What is going on, college basketball fans? Welcome back to another video. Today we have one of our first real college basketball preseason videos where we are going to take Joe Lunardi's preseason bracketology that he actually just came out with yesterday, put it into our own PDF, and fill it out from the first round all the way until the national championship, just like we do throughout the regular season, all the way until March Madness, like we've done the past so many years. We are going to do it here today for preseason. Now, I know that this is way too early, and that is why this is going to be titled like the way too early March Madness predictions, but this is mainly just to do it for fun and get a good preview of a lot of these teams that have expectations to make it to the March Madness tournament this year. These are going to be some of the teams that, like I said, have expectations to get here, but could also be the real contenders to win it all. A lot of offseason drama has been happening through the transfer portal. We got new 5-star recruits coming in, a lot of new players. I'm very excited to kind of preview these teams and just get a look at what my mind is thinking here in August before the season begins on who I think could make a deep run this year in college basketball. So I'm excited to get started. I just want to say subscribe if you guys are new. There's going to be many more college basketball preseason videos coming out. We're going to have college football stuff coming out soon. College football starts here in only a month. And we got college football 25 gaming content here on the channel coming out for you guys as well. So a lot of good stuff here on the channel. Make sure you guys subscribe if you guys haven't already. And let me know at this point in August, down below in the comment section, who is your preseason college basketball national champion. I know it's way too early, but just for fun, let me know that down below in the comment section. And if you guys want to do a little bit more, let me know your final four. So our first region, we do have Kansas as our #1 seed. It makes a lot of sense. They're returning Hunter Dickinson. They're returning Harris at point guard, and they brought in some really good transfers. AJ Storr coming down from Wisconsin, who was a really good player last year, averaged like over 16 points per game. Also, Rylan Griffin coming over from Alabama in the transfer portal. They have a really good bench. KJ Adams coming back. That is going to be a super good starting lineup. And off the bench, they're going to have a lot of their recruits coming in for this year. Also, Elmarco Jackson, who was a freshman 5-star recruit last year. He could take a jump up and play a key role off the bench for this team. He could be their 6th man. There are a lot of really good players on this Kansas team. I expect them to make a deep run this year in March Madness. They have them going up against 16 seed, either Southern or Wagner. I will pick this game for just for fun. I am going to pick Wagner. I think it's really good whenever they are good in college basketball because they have a nice little fan base. But realistically, they are not going to beat Kansas here. Next up, we do have Michigan versus Wake Forest. This is a fun matchup. I would love to see Wake Forest make it to March Madness because they've been so close in so many years, the past couple of years. I'm not sure if they will make it. I kind of feel like they're going to be a bubble team once again, but I'd like to see them in. I am going to take Michigan. They did get a new hire at head coach. They did hire the FAU head coach, and along with him came Big Vlad and also guys like Danny Wolf, who transferred over from Yale. So they have two really, really good big men in Vlad Golden and Danny Wolf, along with some really good guards as well. I think Michigan should bounce back this year. I think around an 8 to 11 seed, somewhere in there is probably where they're going to end up. I think head-to-head versus Wake Forest, I am going to take them to win. Next up, we got Indiana versus McNeese State. McNeese, well-coached team last year, very fast-paced, very good offense. They just did not play many good teams in the regular season, so they were pretty hyped up last year, entering March Madness. Kind of got beat up upon by Gonzaga in the March Madness tournament last year. Can they get a win this year? I actually think Indiana as a 5 seed. I think Mike Woodson, a lot of Indiana fans and just college basketball fans in general, think he could possibly be on the hot seat this year just because they weren't that great last year and did not meet expectations. But with transfers coming in like Miles Rice, like Umar Ballo, we all know he is really good with his big men. Look what he did to Khalil Ware when he was at Oregon as a freshman coming out of high school. was not doing that great. I think he averaged under 5 points a game. He transfers to Indiana his sophomore year, and Mike Woodson had him almost 20 points per game, and he went in the top 20 of the NBA draft. I think, and before that, Trace Jackson Davis, who we all know was a top 5 player easily, maybe even like top 3 in college basketball his senior year, and he's actually doing pretty good off the bench for the Golden State Warriors now. Mike Woodson, very good coach, especially with big men. Now he's getting one of the best big men in the country transfer from Arizona and Umar Ballo. I think that he is going to do really well there. And with Miles Rice, who is like a 6'5" point guard, very good defensively, can score the rock as well. I think Indiana is going to be very good, and they have some other returning pieces coming as well. The only question might be their shooting. And you could say, well, McNeese State, pretty high-paced offense. If Indiana's not shooting the ball, if they have a shooting night, maybe they could catch them. But I am going to take Indiana here. Also, we might have a little bit less upsets just because we're way too early. It's kind of hard to predict, like, say, the game we're on now, a high point to make a deep run in March Madness when they haven't played a single game yet this year. So this is mainly to preview the teams. I will have some upsets that I'm seeing in here, but for the most part, it's not going to be complete chalk by any means, but a lot of the teams that I think are going to be super good this year. Next up, we do have Tennessee versus High Point. I am going to take Tennessee. It is going to be kind of a different look for them this year, more Dalton Connett, but they do still have Zakai Ziegler there at point guard, who seems like he has been there forever, but they still do have some pretty good pieces coming there. Some more transfers from some smaller schools like Dalton Connett was. We'll see if Rick Barnes can turn one of those guys into another super good player as well. I think Tennessee would be High Point here. Next up, we do have Kentucky versus Dayton, an interesting matchup. Kentucky, interesting group of players. I am a big Jackson Robinson fan. I think that he is going to have a monster year for Kentucky. However, they also picked up a guy like Kerr Kriisa, the transfer from West Virginia and before that Arizona, who I'm not so high on. I don't think he's that great of a point guard. Now, if he accepts a role as a shooting guard, I could see him being pretty good for Kentucky just as a pure shooter because he is a very good three-point shooter. But as much as a playmaker, if he has the ball in his hands too much, he can actually be a negative to your team because, yes, he on the assist stat sheet, he will say he averaged around 4 to 6 assists per game. But he turns the ball over a lot, and he also holds the ball way too long and just doesn't make the best decisions all the time for a point guard. I think he's much better as a shooting guard, so it depends on how Pope, the new head coach for Kentucky, will use him. But it is going to be interesting. Still Kentucky. I think that they will beat Dayton here. Dayton, no more Deron Holmes. Going to be interesting. They also lost some other players like Brea in the transfer portal, so it's going to be tough for Dayton. I think they're still going to be pretty good, but I am going to have Kentucky beat them here. Next up, we do have Creighton versus Samford. Now, Creighton, interesting because they're losing a lot, right? They're losing Trey Alexander, Baylor Shireman, but they are bringing back Ryan Cockburner, Stephen Ashworth. Going to be interesting. I think maybe a 3 seed might be a little bit too high for them. I know that they've been super good in recent years. I still think they're going to be a March Madness tournament team, but I think more of like a 6 to 7 seed might be where they're at this year. Ryan Cockburner, one of the best centers in college basketball, returning for, what has to be probably his 5th year of college basketball. I just don't know if it's going to be enough unless Stephen Ashworth really takes off. I know they are bringing in a guy like Pop Isaacs from Texas Tech, who is a really good shooter, but he's another one of those guys who I'm not so sure his efficiency on the court is like that much of a positive. But I do trust McDermott as the head coach to be pretty good. However, Samford is another well-coached team, and they're fast-paced. Yes, they are losing Okoro, who was their best player. He's now over on Kansas State. But I still think they're going to have that high-paced, fast-paced offense that I think could possibly get a win for them in March Madness this year. This is probably going to be my biggest upset I have here on this way too early March Madness predictions. I just think Samford's going to have a really good offense, and Creighton seems to be a little bit overseeded here in my opinion, so I am going to take Samford to get the win. Next up, we do have Michigan State versus Kansas State. Very interesting matchup. Jerome Tang versus Tom Izzo. Two very, very good coaches, 100%. But Izzo and March does not lose in the first round very often. He's got some of these younger guys who are going to start to take over the program, like Xavier Booker. They're going to need these guys to break out. I feel like Kansas State as a 10 seed is very underseeded in my opinion. You know, they brought in some really good transfers. Not only do they have Doug McDaniel, who is that perfect type of point guard that Jerome Tang loves to coach, but they also brought in other guys like Coleman Hawkins and Akor, like we mentioned earlier, which I think are two huge pickups. I really think that Kansas State is going to be slept on this year, and being a 10 seed, I like them to win this game against Michigan State. Even though it is Tom Izzo, I like Kansas State here to win. Next up, we do have North Carolina versus South Dakota State. North Carolina is returning R.J. Davis, but this is going to be the end of the Armando Bacot era. He has moved on after being there forever. R.J. Davis been there forever too, but he's back for his senior year, and he is going to be leading some of these young players who are super good out of high school for North Carolina. They are for sure going to be really good. A 2 seed, I think that they could definitely get there, especially with R.J. Davis's leadership and these young talented players. But yeah, I'm not sure how far they will go this year in March Madness. We'll definitely have to see how they are looking on the court this year, but they should definitely get past South Dakota State here, so I will take North Carolina. Next up, we do have Houston versus Marist, and I'm going to take Houston here to win this game. Yes, they are losing Jamal Shed at point guard, but they are still bringing back a lot of guys like LJ Cryer, Lon Roberts. They have some veterans on this team, and they are also bringing in, some new players as well. So I think Houston definitely going to be really good this year. I mean, the Big 12 is looking stacked. Kansas, Houston, Baylor, Iowa State, even teams like Kansas State. Going to be super tough this year in the Big 12, as it always is, but this year especially. Next up, we have Clemson versus Florida. This is like a perfect 8-9 matchup. Based on my opinions on the preseason, I love this 8-9 matchup because Clemson, Florida, both going to be really good players. Clemson made a pretty good, decent run in the tournament last year. They're losing a couple of guys, but are still going to be pretty good, bringing back some of those guys that were on that team. And same thing with Florida. Florida bringing back Walter Clayton, I think, is huge at the guard position, and that's going to be the main reason that I am going to have Florida win this game and move on to the next round there. Next up, Texas A&M versus Bradley. I actually really do like this Bradley pick a lot because in the Missouri Valley Conference, you had Drake last year, who was really good. You had Indiana State, who was super good. Indiana State's coach moved down to St. Louis. Robbie Avita followed him. And Drake lost their head coach to West Virginia. Tucker DeVries, who was another one of the best players in that conference, left as well. Bradley, bringing back a lot of players, looking really good. I think Bradley is a sleeper to pull off an upset this year in college basketball. Texas A&M, I love Wade Taylor. I love Henry Coleman. Super good duo there at Texas A&M, but it seems like they can never get the job done, and I'm going to take an upset here. I like Bradley out of the Missouri Valley Conference to get a win here in the first round. Next up, we got Purdue versus Arkansas State. To be honest, I don't know too much about Arkansas State this year, but definitely going to look out for them in the Sun Belt, as that is, the same conference as one of my favorite teams, Marshall. So Arkansas State, I'm going to keep my eye out on them, especially if Joe Lunardi thinks that they are going to be good enough to win that league. But Purdue, interesting scenario. You could look at one hand and say, yeah, they're losing Zach Edey finally. They're going to be horrible. But on the other hand, you can say they are returning a lot of these players who just played in a national championship game and have a ton of experience now, like Fletcher Lawyer, like Braden Smith, and most importantly, in my opinion, Trey Kaufman-Renn. He is going to be the replacement center for Zach Edey and has had 2 years of experience being Zach Edey's backup heading into his junior year now. I think his role is going to increase a ton, and look out for Trey Kaufman-Renn to be one of my favorite breakout players this year, and I'm going to take Purdue here to get past Arkansas State. Next up, we have UCLA versus Boise State. They're going to be a solid matchup. UCLA, one of those teams who is going to be super young this year, but is expected behind Cronin to get back on track. Cronin, great head coach. He's got to get this team back to the tournament this year. Projected as a 6th seed, so high expectations for him and this young team. I think that they can do it. I think that they beat Boise State. Boise State always has solid teams. I love Boise State, man. I want to see their basketball program get a win in March Madness, but they just haven't been able to get it done. And as much as the Mountain West has really emerged in college basketball over the past couple of years, Boise State has been one that has been having struggles getting over that hump in the March Madness tournament, so I am going to take UCLA there. Next up, Arizona versus Charleston. Charleston, interesting to see them here considering they lost their head coach in Pat Kelsey. He's now the head coach at Louisville. So that is an interesting one there. They could definitely still have a pretty good team. But Arizona, even though they're losing Omar Ballo, they're still going to have Caleb Love. They're still going to have Jaden Bradley. They're going to have that awesome backcourt there. And I still think Arizona is going to win this game. And they're also bringing in one of the stars of March Madness last year in Trey Townsend, who was the big man for Oakland, Jack Golke's teammate down there, who was just going stupid, averaging like 25 and 10 in the couple March Madness games that they played. Trey Townsend, a beast. Excited to see him play there for Arizona. Arizona now going to be Big 12 basketball this year, so that's going to be interesting. It's not going to be a cakewalk in the regular season anymore. Next up, Marquette versus St. Mary's. Marquette, very good team. I think that people are underestimating some of these players that they have coming back, like especially Cam Jones. I don't think anybody's underestimating him, but they're losing Tyler Kolek. They're losing Iguodaro, but Cam Jones is going to be able to absolutely go crazy for this team. And they have other guards on this team, like a Stevie Mitchell, like a Sean Jones, who are going to be super good this year and take that next step up. I believe that for sure. And for St. Mary's, losing Aiden Mahaney, he's now transferred over to UConn. That's a big loss for St. Mary's. I still think that, 10th seed, probably about where they're going to be this year. St. Mary's always getting into the tournament. Bennett has an excellent team every single year. Super good coach. I think they'll probably get in the tournament, but I think they will lose here to Marquette because, you could say, losing Iguodaro and Tyler Kolek, Marquette's going to take a step down, but I don't think they're going to be a 7 seed. I think they're more of a 5 seed is about where they'll be. I think Cam Jones, Sean Jones, Stevie Mitchell, they're going to have them there. Next up, we do have Auburn versus Fort Wayne. Don't know too much about Fort Wayne, let's be honest here, but we will learn about them here as we get closer and closer to the season and as we see a couple of these games here when the season does begin. Auburn, however, going to be super good. JB Peggs coming in as a transfer from Furman, going to be a super good guard for him this year, and they're returning a lot of the great players from last year as well. I like Auburn a lot as a 2 seed. Love to see him there. Moving on to the next round. Next up, UConn. UConn still as a 1 seed. I don't hate that, but they did lose 4 of their starters and 4 of their best players. But they are returning Alex Caravan, their only returning starter. He was on both national championship teams these last 2 years, and he is going to be a huge piece for this team this year. And guys like Samson Johnson and guys like Aiden Mahaney, Samson Johnson, going to take a huge role on this UConn team. I'm super excited to see what Dan Hurley can do after all the offseason drama about him potentially taking Kentucky job, potentially taking the Los Angeles Lakers job in the NBA, returning to UConn, staying home, and looking to try to three-peat. I think UConn, for sure, getting by Colgate here in the first round. Next up, BYU versus Ole Miss. This is interesting. BYU losing their coach to Kentucky, also Jackson Robinson, 2 big losses, but still going to be a pretty decent team. I just don't know if they are going to have what it takes to get a win in March Madness this year, especially Ole Miss, who's bringing in some great transfers. I think Chris Beard does finally get to the March Madness tournament again with Ole Miss for the first time, and I am going to take Ole Miss and Coach Beard. We know what he can do in March Madness. I'm going to take them to move on to the next round. Next up, we have Cincinnati, and Cincinnati, interesting team, and I love to see them as a 5 seed here. It's been a minute since they have been, back in the March Madness tournament, so I know their fan base is going to be hyped for this year, what the expectations for them to get here. They brought in a transfer from Texas in Dylan Mitchell. I think that he is going to play a key piece on this team, and they just have a really good team. I'm super excited. They do have to go against Grand Canyon, against Grant Foster there, who is returning again for this team. And Grand Canyon just made the tournament last year, was in a very close game with Alabama in the first round of the tournament last year. They did end up losing, but that Alabama team ended up making it to the Final Four. So look out for this Grand Canyon team. Unfortunately for Cincinnati, I am going to take Grand Canyon, but that is just a tough matchup. Whoever gets matched up with them this year, if they were as good as they were last year, probably even better, it's going to be tough to beat them in the first round. They're going to be one of the biggest favorite upsets in the entire March Madness tournament. Next up, we do have Texas versus UC Irvine, and this Texas team, it's put together kind of weird. You know, they brought in guys like Arthur Kaluma, and with Caden Shedrick returning, I just feel like it's kind of like a weird combination of players where I'm not sure how good Texas is going to be this year in a absolutely stacked Big 12 conference, but I still think they're going to be pretty good. I am going to have them beat UC Irvine right here, but I'm not sure how far I'm going to have them go. I just think it's a weird mix of players. We're going to have to see how they mesh on the court. Next up, we do have Mississippi State versus Oregon or Villanova. And Mississippi State, I am super high on this year. I'm a big fan of Josh Hubbard, who was a star, super underrated player for them as a freshman last year, made the tournament with them, and I think they are going to be super good once again. Oregon, Villanova, I think Oregon actually underrated as an 11 seed there. Villanova probably going to be around there, just on the bubble of making the tournament this year. But Mississippi State, and also bringing in a transfer from Penn State and Connie Clary, that is going to be an awesome backcourt, one of the better ones in college basketball. Give me Mississippi State here. I think that they are one of my biggest sleepers heading into next year. Gonzaga versus Akron. I am going to take Gonzaga here. Gonzaga has a deep bench this year, returning a lot of players from last year, pretty much everyone except Antoine Watson, and yeah, super excited for Gonzaga. Illinois versus Miami. Interesting matchup here. I'm not really too high on either one of these teams, but I think Illinois finally getting a really good true point guard in Kylan Boswell, transfer from Arizona, I think is going to be huge for them. I am going to have Illinois win this one here, if I could spell. There we go. Next up, we do have Iowa State versus Weber State, and Iowa State going to be super good. They have one of the best returning teams from last year, bring back pretty much everybody, and I'm super excited for this Iowa State team. I think a lot of their young players are going to make improvements as well, and they're going to get even better. Super excited to see it happen. Next up, we do have Alabama as our final 1 seed. I mean, yes, Alabama is going to be crazy this year. Bringing back Mark Sears, bringing back Grant Nelson, bringing in some transfers, like a Chris Youngblood from South Florida. I think this is going to be a fantastic team and a fantastic year for Alabama. I mean, they're projected as a top 4 team. When was the last time Alabama basketball preseason was rated higher than Alabama football preseason? Kind of crazy. Nate Oates is doing his thing, coming off of a Final Four appearance, bringing in the right guys, bringing back the right guys. Looking really good for Alabama next year. Ohio State versus Xavier. 2 teams in Ohio here. Would be an awesome matchup. I think that Zach Fremantle is going to be awesome for Xavier this year, but Ohio State bringing in some great transfers after having a really good end of the year last year after the coaching change. I like Ohio State here. I'm actually pretty high on them. I think that they get higher than a 5 seed. I actually like them more as like a 6 or a 5. Next up, we do have Arkansas versus Princeton. Arkansas, new coach, John Calipari, moved from Kentucky over to Arkansas. One of the biggest headlines of the offseason this year. And wow, he has brought in pretty much his whole team from Kentucky and then added a guy like John L. Davis, who has been a very good guard for FAU the past couple of years, and also still having Trevon Brazil there, which I think is huge to keep him, because he has been a guy that Arkansas fans have been waiting for him to break out, but he's had some injury problems. I think this could be the year for them. I think Arkansas, a really well-built team, not just behind, the freshmen and the really good players that John Calipari always has, but some veteran players around them as well with some March Madness experience. I am excited to watch them play. Next up, we do have Texas Tech versus Vermont. Catamounts always in there, no surprise there. Texas Tech, going to be super good this year. I'm excited to see them play. Bringing a guy, I thought one of my favorite transfers, J.T. Toppin from New Mexico. Going to be awesome. Next up, St. John's versus either Maryland or Pitt. I am going to have Maryland beat Pitt. I think Maryland's going to be underrated this year. I think people have been expecting Maryland to kind of emerge into the March Madness tournament and go on a little bit of a run maybe for the past couple of years, but they have just been unable to do so. Maybe this year could be the year. I'm going to have them beat Pitt. And then St. John's with Rick Pitino. I'm actually thinking about maybe having Maryland move on here. I think Maryland just has a really solid team. I think they might be underrated as an 11 seed this year. I think they're going to surprise some people. And St. John's, they're bringing in some guys like Kadarius Richmond, which I actually really do like Kadarius Richmond. Moving from Seton Hall to St. John's, that's a low blow to Seton Hall fans for sure. Staying in the Big East there, Kadarius Richmond is so good. I think he's going to be a star for St. John's. I think they're going to be in the March Madness tournament, but I'm going to go with a little bit of upset here and go with Maryland. Next up, we do have Baylor versus Louisiana Tech, and Baylor is a team that I have been waiting to talk about. Baylor might be one of my favorites to win the championship this year, honestly. I mean, bringing in Jeremy Roach, bringing in Norchad Omier, they are going to be a problem. And they also have like Rob Wright coming in as a 5-star. Come on. Baylor is going to be ridiculous. We know what they do with those 5-star guards. They produce stars in college basketball and NBA lottery draft picks. Give me Baylor to move on here. They are going to be very, very good. Next up, we have Memphis versus Rutgers. Very fun matchup here between Rutgers, who is going to have Dylan Harper, and company with those great 5-stars that Rutgers got this year. And then Memphis, who has guys like Tyrese Hunter coming in. Going to be a very interesting game that should have a lot of NBA scouts watching for sure. I actually think that Rutgers might have the better overall team, though. Yes, Dylan Harper is young. Yes, these other guys like Ace are really young. But I think that Rutgers is just going to have the better overall team than Memphis. I just think so. I mean, if David Jones was returning, this would be a different story. Memphis would be one of my sleepers. I still think they're a sleeper. If they can get this team to mesh the right way, we'll see how they play. But I like Rutgers here to move on. Next up, Duke. Duke, 2-seed versus Lipscomb. I am going to have Duke win. Cooper Flagg coming in. This great freshman class coming in here for John Shire. This is maybe probably the first really big 5-star recruiting class coming in for John Shire. Excited to see what he does with it, especially Cooper Flagg. Been one of the most hyped up players in college basketball for a little while coming out of high school. So I'm super excited to see him play. Kansas versus Michigan. I am going to take Kansas. We've kind of previewed a lot of these teams throughout the first round. So now we're going to kind of go through who I think would maybe win these matchups, who I'm expecting kind of to be the better team between these teams. That's kind of how I'm going to do this bracket since we are way too early at the beginning of August here. Next up, Indiana versus Tennessee. I actually think Indiana is going to be the better team. I think that they have a lot of really good players. I think that their shooting is going to be better. I think that Woodson is actually a really good coach, and he's going to prove why here and get his team back to the Sweet 16. Kentucky and Samford. I'm not going to lie. Like I said, I'm not a big fan of Kirk Kriisa. I think he could be the downfall of this team. I'm not sure how good Pope's going to do in his first year as a coach. I think Jackson Robinson's going to carry a lot of this team when it gets to this point in the season. I know Kentucky has some other really good players as well, but I think Samford's offense is maybe one of my favorites as far as a potential Cinderella. at this point in the season. I know we haven't seen them play without a core and company, but they are going to be one of the most high-paced, fast-paced offense once again this year and put up a lot of points. I think that they can definitely get it done with these two matchups. I know North Carolina has R.J. Davis coming back, and they got guys like Drake Powell and Ian coming in, who are going to be super good players. I'm very excited to watch them play as freshmen, but I don't think that they're a better team right now than Kansas State. I think Kansas State as a 10 seed is outrageous. I think that's super underrating them. And coming out of a Big 12, they're going to be having a very tough, grinded out schedule. Give me Kansas State here. Let's go ahead and finish these region by region. I got Kansas, Indiana. I'd love to see Indiana pulled off. I just think Kansas going to be too good, man. With these transfers they brought in, with DeJuan Harris, man, that means AJ Storr isn't even going to have to play point guard. They can play him as the 2 guard, man, and that is going to be just insane. And yeah, I'm very excited for this Kansas team. Then you got Hunter Dickinson down low. You got KJ Adams returning, who has made improvements every single year. Rylan Griffin, who is like the perfect 3-and-D small forward for this Kansas team and a good bench. It's going to be tough to not have Kansas, at least in the Final Four, to be honest. And I am going to go with Kansas State here as well. So we are going to have the rivalry game in the Elite Eight of Kansas versus Kansas State. I think that they are going to beat Sanford here. I think they're going to have the offense for it. I think Doug McDaniel's going to break out as a guard for Kansas State. But I am going to have Kansas make the Final Four. I just think that they are the better overall team, and they do have the better bench. Next up, we do have Houston and Florida. I think Florida definitely could do some good things. You know, Matt Handleton, I think him still being injured, as far as what I know, unless he is playing, I think that is going to be a huge blow for Florida. I hope he does play. Like I mentioned earlier, I am a little bit of a Marshall fan, so I want to see him succeed, as he is a former transfer from Marshall over to Florida. Seeing him go down last year was a big hit to Florida. I think they could use him this year. I don't think they're going to have enough to go up against this Houston defense. And I think Houston to make the Sweet 16, most likely a lock. Bradley versus Purdue. Like I said, I think Trey Kaufman-Renn might be the breakout player of the year. I'm going to take Purdue here against Bradley, even though I do like Bradley out of the Missouri Valley this year. To maybe pull off an upset, which I did have them do, I just think Purdue going to be too good there. UCLA versus Arizona. Former Pac-12 battle for so long in college basketball. I'm glad that we get to see it here in the round of 32 because they are splitting up UCLA to the Big 10, Arizona to the Big 12. But I think UCLA probably a little bit too young here. I am going to have Arizona move on behind the awesome backcourt of Bradley and Love. Marquette versus Auburn. This is going to be a great matchup. I think it's going to come down to the matchup down low, with Chani Broome down there. Marquette losing a guy like Igudaro. Going to have his replacement in the game. I think Marquette's guard's going to be awesome in this game, but Auburn's got some great guards too. I'm going to take the Auburn Tigers to move on. Then we got Houston versus Purdue. And this is actually a tough one for me. I think Purdue's guards are underrated because, everybody just thought, Zach Edey's real tall. All the guards do is feed him. But Braden Smith took some real steps last year. I think him with Trey Kaufman-Renn is going to be a problem. And it wouldn't surprise me if Purdue did beat Houston. So I'm going to have Purdue knock them out here in the Sweet 16, and Purdue moves on to their second Elite Eight here in a row under Matt Painter. Next up, we do have Arizona versus Auburn. And Arizona, another Big 12 team. Look at all these Big 12 teams. Kansas State over here. We got Houston in Sweet 16, Arizona in Sweet 16 over here. But I am going to have both, unlike this side, I am going to have both Big 12 teams lose in the Sweet 16 here, as I do think Auburn is super good this year, man. And I'm going to have them move on to the next round. Then we do have Purdue versus Auburn. And I think Chani Broome actually has the experience over Trey Kaufman-Renn here. And the guards match up pretty well. JP Peggs is a guy I'm super excited for. And I think the surrounding cast, as far as like the forwards, I give the advantage to Auburn here. Bruce Pearl gets back to the Final Four for the second time. I like that one there. And next up, we do have UConn versus Ole Miss. UConn going up against Chris Beard. That's going to be a fun game there. I think UConn, like I mentioned earlier, Alex Garabin going to be the leader of that team. Dan Hurley, the best coach in college basketball, undoubtedly. And I just think they're going to be well coached. Samson Johnson is a guy I think is going to break out as a center for the UConn Huskies, and I'm very excited for it. I think Aiden Mahaney is going to be an awesome player for them as well. UConn moves on to the Sweet 16. Grand Canyon versus Texas. Again, I just don't like the way that Texas, the team that they put together this year, I just don't know how well they're going to mesh. I'd like to see them prove me wrong. I think Rodney Terry is an excellent head coach. And underrated because he did have to take over for Chris Beard. But he got hired there after being their interim head coach for a reason, and that's because they were winning, and he took them to the Elite Eight a couple of years ago. So I am going to take, Grand Canyon. Like I said, I hope it does work out for Rodney Terry. I think he's a good coach. But I think Grand Canyon, with Grant Foster coming back, Tyron Grant Foster, this team, hungry, after seeing the team that knocked them out in a close one go to the Final Four, I think they're going to be one of the better mid-majors this year on the board. I have them making Sweet 16 as a 12 seed. Mississippi State versus Gonzaga, very good matchup. Gonzaga, Ryan Nimhard coming back. You're going to have Ben Gregg and Graham Ike down low, bringing back a lot of players, bringing in some transfers as well. I don't want to see Mississippi State see Gonzaga this early because I am so high on Conrad Clary and Josh Hubbard, especially Josh Hubbard. But I am going to take Mississippi State. Let's have a little bit of fun with it. I don't want to just chalk it all the way. Even though I think Gonzaga probably win that game, I want to have a little bit of fun with it because I want to show you guys how big of a sleeper I think Mississippi State is this year. So I want to have them go at least decently far. Illinois versus Iowa State. Like I said, I'm not too high on Illinois this year. I am very high on Iowa State. I am taking them to move on. Next up, I am going to take UConn to defeat Grand Canyon. I'd like to move on Grand Canyon just for fun, but I think UConn's going to be too good. Dan Hurley back in the Elite Eight, trying to three-peat in the March Madness tournament. That would be insane if that actually happens. Mississippi State versus Iowa State. This is going to be a very good matchup. I think Iowa State definitely has the advantages here, but I kind of want to move on Mississippi State here. I'm going to move on Iowa State. They're just the better overall team. They have experience off last year, and they are returning pretty much everyone. And this is going to be the boring pick, but I am going to have UConn in the Final Four. I don't want to see it either, I know, but I just think UConn's super good. They have experience. They have Dan Hurley, who has leadership. They have Alex Caravan, who has had that experience, who is going to help them as a player-wise. And I think that they get back to the Final Four, given the matchups they have here. Iowa State would be a tough matchup for them, but they really, I'm not seeing anybody who's going to upset them early at this point in the preseason. Next up, we have Alabama versus Ohio State. I really do like Ohio State, but I don't think they're beating Alabama here. Two very good football schools going at it here in the round of 32. Arkansas versus Texas Tech. That would be an awesome game. It's not the Musselman Arkansas teams that are grinded out defense. It's going to be John Calipari. So it's not going to be Texas Tech versus Arkansas grinded out like we are used to over the past few years. But it's going to be a very good game, and I am going to take Arkansas here to win. I think they can make it to Sweet 16 with these matchups. Texas Tech going to be very good, like I mentioned earlier. It's going to be a close game, but I am going to take Arkansas. Maryland versus Baylor. I'm taking Baylor. I'm very high on Baylor this year. I'm going to have them move on. Next up, Rutgers versus Duke. This is interesting because, Cooper Flagg versus Dylan Harper. A lot of the top recruits in this year's class going to these two schools. Could go either way, honestly, and I'm going to take a 10 over a 2 here. I'm going to take the Rutgers Scarlet Knights to beat the Duke Blue Devils, and a ton of scouts watching that game. Maybe at least 2, maybe 3 top 5 picks going to be playing in this game. Alabama versus Arkansas. I'm taking Alabama. Very good team there, like I mentioned before. And I am going to take Baylor over Rutgers here. So, like I said, not a lot of Cinderellas. I do have, Kansas State making it as a 10 seed because I am pretty high on them. And I'm not too high on teams like North Carolina and Kentucky, who are kind of in that region as higher seeds. But like I said, this is like a way too early preview, so it's kind of hard to take a team like a McNeese State or a Dayton or teams like that at this point in the offseason, in the preseason, I should say, to go pretty far. So we do have our Final Four: Kansas, UConn. Oh, I didn't pick that last game, actually, between Alabama and Baylor, where I am. I do really like this Baylor team, but I think Alabama just has the experience to get back there, so I am going to take Nate Oates to get back to the Final Four, and that honestly sets up an awesome storyline between Auburn and Alabama. Obviously, big rivalry game there, and we get to see it in the Final Four. That would be awesome. So Kansas, UConn first. I am going to finally have UConn get knocked out, and they are unable to three-peat at this point in the preseason. I just think Kansas is a way better team, and it would surprise me if Kansas is not one of the favorites to win the national championship this season. And then we got Auburn versus Alabama, and I am going to take Alabama to win this one. I think that these are the two top teams in the preseason in college basketball this year. Mark Sears, DeJuan Harris, Rylan Griffin going up against this former team who he just went to the Final Four with last year in Alabama. Now he's on Kansas. Lots of very good matchups here. Grant Nelson down low for Alabama. You got Hunter Dickinson down low for Kansas. This would be an awesome matchup, but I am going to have Kansas win this game. Could come down to coaching. I think Bill Self, you could say, I'd probably say Dan Hurley is the better head coach right now, the best head coach in college basketball, but Bill Self right behind him there at number 2. Nate Oates is getting up there, and if he makes a national championship game this year, he's going to be up there in the top 5 probably as well after making a Final Four last year, and he has a very solid team. So I'm excited for this season. I think, I didn't want to chalk it up too much, but I do have who I think are the top 2 preseason teams in college basketball making it to my national championship game. Let me know, like I mentioned earlier, down below in the comment section, who you think would be your national champion at this point in the preseason. And also, if you guys want to let me know your Final Four as well, given this bracket. But subscribe for more college basketball preseason content. Season is not too far away, so we're getting started on the preseason stuff now. We're going to have preseason college football stuff and college football season. We're going to cover college football very hard on this channel this year. Super excited for it. So make sure you guys subscribe. And yeah, guys, that's going to do it for this one. I'll see you in the next one.